Have you ever had a difficult day that somehow became even worse because of the way you kept thinking about it? Something goes wrong in the morning, and hours later you are still replaying it. Someone says something unpleasant, and you carry their words long after the conversation ends. A plan fails, and suddenly the entire day feels ruined. One disappointment becomes a story about everything that is wrong with your life. The event may have lasted 5 minutes, but your mind keeps extending it for hours. This is where Stoicism offers something surprisingly practical. It does not promise that life will always feel pleasant. It does not tell you to pretend that problems do not matter. And it does not ask you to force yourself into artificial positivity. Instead, Stoic philosophy teaches you how to stop making difficult circumstances heavier than they already are. That distinction matters, because there are two kinds of difficulty. There is the difficulty created by the event itself, and then there is the additional difficulty created by your interpretation of that event. You cannot always prevent the first, but you can learn to question the second. Imagine spilling a cup of coffee on an important document. The mistake has happened. Getting angry will not unspill the coffee. Repeating the scene in your mind will not restore the paper. Blaming yourself for the next 3 hours will not improve the situation. You still have to deal with what happened, but you do not have to add unnecessary suffering to the problem. This is one reason Stoicism has remained relevant for so long. Its central concern is not how to create a perfect life. It is how to develop a mind capable of meeting an imperfect life without being shattered by every inconvenience. Epictetus repeatedly brought philosophy back to our judgments and responses. Marcus Aurelius practiced returning his attention to the task immediately in front of him. Seneca examined how anticipation, fear, anger, and excessive attachment can disturb the mind. Their approaches were different, but the underlying discipline was clear. You may not control everything that happens, but you have a responsibility for how you meet what happens. And that can change the way an ordinary day feels. A difficult conversation does not have to become an entire afternoon of resentment. A mistake does not have to become a verdict on your ability. Someone else's opinion does not have to become the definition of your worth. An unexpected setback does not have to erase everything that went well. The point is not to deny what hurts. The point is to stop giving every unpleasant moment unlimited authority over your mind. In the next 5 rules, we are going to look at Stoic principles that can help you create more mental steadiness in ordinary life. Not through empty encouragement, but through a different way of interpreting events, choosing your responses, and directing your attention. Because sometimes feeling better does not require changing everything around you. Sometimes it begins with learning how to meet the same circumstances with a wiser mind. A difficult moment does not deserve to become the definition of your entire day. Something goes wrong. You make a mistake. Someone speaks to you disrespectfully. A plan suddenly changes. Your first reaction may be frustration. That is human. But then the mind often does something unnecessary. It keeps the event alive. You replay the conversation while eating. You think about it while working. You imagine what you should have said. You predict what the other person might do next. By evening, the original problem may be completely over, yet you are still emotionally living inside it. The Stoics recognize that this is where suffering can become larger than the original event. Epictetus taught that we should examine the impressions that arise in the mind instead of automatically accepting every interpretation as truth. Consider the difference between these two statements. That person criticized something I did, and that person criticized me, which means I am not good enough. The first describes an event. The second creates a judgment about yourself. Those are not the same thing. Someone can criticize your work without defining your ability. Someone can reject an idea without rejecting your entire character. Someone can disagree with you without becoming the final authority on whether you are right. Yet the mind often turns temporary experiences into permanent conclusions. This is why a small incident can suddenly affect the rest of the day. The problem is no longer what happened. The problem becomes everything your mind has attached to what happened. Imagine receiving an unpleasant comment. You could consider whether there is anything useful in it. Perhaps there is. Maybe you made a genuine mistake. Then correct it. Maybe the criticism was unfair. Then recognize that and continue. Either way, the useful information can be separated from the emotional noise. You do not need to carry the entire conversation around with you. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly returned his attention to the task immediately before him. That discipline is easy to underestimate. Your attention is one of the few resources you spend every moment without realizing it. You are giving today's attention to yesterday's event, and the event receives something it never earned, more of your life. Think about how often this happens. Someone cuts you off in traffic. The moment lasts seconds, but you spend the next 20 minutes complaining about it. A colleague makes an unnecessary remark. The conversation lasts 1 minute. You replay it 10 times. Someone sends a message you do not like. Instead of waiting for more information, your mind creates an entire explanation. You are no longer responding to reality. You are responding to a story. Seneca understood that the mind can enlarge disturbances through anticipation and repeated thought. That does not mean ignoring legitimate problems. If something requires action, take action. If you owe an apology, give one. If you need to defend yourself, do so calmly. If a situation requires a difficult decision, make it. But once the necessary response has been made, continuing to mentally fight the same battle serves little purpose. You cannot change the sentence that was already spoken. You cannot unsend yesterday's message. You cannot rewrite the moment that already passed. What remains available to you is the next moment. That is where Stoic discipline becomes practical. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" ask, "What is required of me now?" Maybe the answer is to correct something. Maybe it is to remain silent. Maybe it is to continue working. Maybe it is to let the matter go. The answer will not always be the same, but the question brings you back from emotional repetition to deliberate action. There is another important lesson here. You do not need to feel good before you continue with your day. Stoicism is not about forcing yourself to become cheerful after something unpleasant. You can be disappointed and still work. You can be irritated and still speak respectfully. You can feel embarrassed and still correct your mistake. You can be hurt and still refuse to let bitterness direct your behavior. That is far more realistic than pretending nothing bothers you. A steady mind is not a mind that never experiences disturbance. It is a mind that does not allow every disturbance to become its master. So when something unpleasant happens today, resist the temptation to give it an entire chapter of your life. Look at it. Understand it. Respond to what actually requires your response. Then notice when your mind begins adding unnecessary layers. That is the moment to stop. Not because the event did not matter, because your remaining hours matter too much to surrender them to something that has already happened. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly wondering how you are being perceived. You say something, then immediately question whether it sounded foolish. You make a decision, then imagine what your family might think. You accomplish something, but the satisfaction disappears because nobody noticed. Someone criticizes you, and suddenly you question everything you believed about yourself. The problem is not simply that other people have opinions. The problem begins when those opinions become the measuring instrument you use to evaluate your own life. The Stoics challenged this dependence on external judgment because they understood how unstable it makes a person's mind. Marcus Aurelius lived under constant observation. As emperor, his decisions affected enormous numbers of people, and he could not possibly satisfy every opinion surrounding him. If praise had been his standard, criticism could have destroyed his confidence. If popularity had been his standard, he would have been forced to change direction every time public opinion changed. Instead, he repeatedly brought his attention back to virtue. Was the action just? Was it reasonable? Was it courageous? Was he acting with self-control? Those questions were more important than whether everyone approved. That principle is still useful because modern life gives us endless opportunities to seek approval. A message gets ignored. You wonder what you did wrong. A post receives little attention. You question whether people value you. Someone disagrees with your decision. You begin defending yourself before they have even asked for an explanation. A person does not respond enthusiastically to your idea. You immediately assume the idea must have been foolish. Your mind becomes a courtroom where everyone else has been appointed judge, and you are constantly waiting for a verdict. But other people's opinions are not stable enough to carry that responsibility. One person may admire the exact quality another person dislikes. One person may think you are too quiet. Another may appreciate your calmness. Someone may consider your ambition excessive, may consider it admirable. If you build your sense of peace around those reactions, your inner state will constantly change, because the people around you constantly change. Epictetus offered a different foundation. Instead of spending your energy controlling what other people think, examine what actually belongs to you. You can control whether you behave honestly. You can control whether you keep your word. You can control whether you listen when correction is deserved. You can control whether you treat people fairly. But you cannot control the conclusions someone else reaches about you. That distinction becomes especially important when criticism arrives. Not every criticism deserves rejection. Some criticism contains information you genuinely need. A wise person can listen without becoming dependent on the critic. Ask, is there something here that can make me better? If there is, learn from it. If there is not, you don't have to carry it simply because someone said it confidently. This is the difference between humility and insecurity. Humility says, I may have something to learn. Insecurity says, tell me what you think of me so I can decide what to think of myself. The first creates growth. The second creates dependence. Seneca understood that a person should develop an internal standard rather than constantly looking outward for confirmation. That does not mean becoming arrogant. In fact, arrogance is often another form of dependence. A person who constantly needs to prove that they are superior is still allowing other people to determine their emotional state. True independence is quieter. You don't need to announce that you don't care what people think. You simply become more selective about which opinions deserve your attention. Consider a craftsman working carefully on something meaningful. One person walks past and says it is excellent. Another says it is ordinary. If the craftsman changes the work every time someone comments, the work will never become coherent. Instead, the craftsman listens carefully, examines the criticism, and decides whether it contains anything useful. Then, the work continues. Your life deserves the same approach. Listen, consider, decide, continue. You do not need unanimous approval before making a reasonable decision. You do not need everyone to understand your path. You do not need to explain every personal choice. And you certainly do not need to turn every disagreement into a battle for validation. There will always be someone who misunderstands you. There will always be someone who disapproves. There will always be someone who thinks you should have chosen differently. That is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that you are living among other human beings with their own judgments. The goal is not to become indifferent to everyone. The goal is to become capable of hearing an opinion without immediately handing it authority over your peace. When your own principles become clearer, this becomes easier. You begin asking a better question. Can I respect the way I handled this? If the answer is yes, you do not need a crowd to confirm it. And if the answer is no, you can correct yourself without collapsing under shame. That is a much stronger position to live from. Your peace becomes less fragile because it no longer rises and falls with every compliment, disagreement, rejection, or expression of approval. You still listen. You still learn. You still care about treating people well. But you stop requiring the outside world to constantly tell you that you are allowed to respect yourself. Some experiences arrive in your life without permission. A plan fails after you worked hard for it. A conversation becomes uncomfortable. You make a decision and later realize it was the wrong one. Something you expected to happen simply does not happen. Your first instinct may be to think, why is this happening to me? But there is another question that can change the way you experience difficulty. What can this moment teach me? That is not the same as pretending the situation is good. It is not. A setback can genuinely hurt. Failure can be disappointing. Embarrassment can be uncomfortable. Uncertainty can make you restless. Stoicism does not require you to deny those reactions. It asks you to use them intelligently. Epictetus understood that circumstances themselves do not automatically determine the quality of your character. What matters is how you respond to them. Think about someone learning to play an instrument. Their fingers hurt. They make mistakes. They play the wrong notes. Sometimes they sound terrible. If they interpret every mistake as proof that they have no ability, they will eventually stop practicing. But if they treat each mistake as information, the same difficulty becomes part of their education. Life can be approached similarly. A difficult conversation can reveal that you need to communicate more carefully. A failed attempt can show you that your method needs improvement. A disappointment can expose an unrealistic expectation. A mistake can reveal a weakness that you never noticed before. The experience remains unpleasant, but it becomes useful. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself to meet obstacles as part of the work of living, rather than treating every difficulty as an interruption to life. That perspective matters because many people secretly believe that progress should happen without resistance. They imagine that once they are disciplined, life will become easier. Once they make good decisions, nothing will go wrong. Once they become confident, they will never feel uncertain. But strength is not proven when everything cooperates. It becomes visible when circumstances refuse to cooperate. A person who has never been tested has limited evidence of what they can handle. This is why difficult moments can become training grounds. Suppose someone speaks to you unfairly. You cannot control what they said, but you can practice choosing your response instead of immediately giving in to anger. Suppose you make an embarrassing mistake. You cannot undo the moment, but you can practice admitting it without creating a dramatic story about your entire identity. Suppose an important plan fails. You cannot rewrite the result, but you can examine what happened and decide what deserves to change. Every situation offers a choice between reaction and examination. Reaction says, "This should not be happening." Examination asks, "Now that it has happened, what should I do?" The second question is more useful because it moves you toward action. Seneca wrote extensively about preparing the mind for adversity. His point was not that people should spend their lives expecting disaster. It was that a person should not be shocked by the basic unpredictability of existence. Things change. Plans fail. People disappoint us. Mistakes happen. Circumstances shift. That is not evidence that life is broken. It is part of the environment in which character is developed. There is also something important to understand about failure. A failed outcome does not automatically mean a failed person. You can make a poor decision without becoming a foolish person forever. You can lose an opportunity without becoming unsuccessful. You can be rejected without becoming worthless. You can discover a weakness without becoming defined by it. The mistake is information. Your response determines what happens next. This is where many people lose valuable energy. They spend more time feeling ashamed of a mistake than learning from it. They replay what they should have done. They criticize themselves. They imagine how others perceive them. Meanwhile, the actual lesson remains unexplored. A Stoic approach is more practical. What happened? What part was under my control? What part was not? What did I do well? Where did I act poorly? What should I change next time? Then move forward with the answer. You do not need to carry the entire emotional weight of yesterday into tomorrow, just to prove that you took the lesson seriously. Learning is enough. Growth is enough. Correction is enough. And sometimes the thing that feels like an interruption is actually revealing something you needed to discover. A difficult person may reveal your impatience. A failed plan may reveal your lack of preparation. A disappointment may reveal how strongly you attached yourself to one particular outcome. A mistake may reveal a habit that needed attention. The experience may not have been pleasant, but it can still become useful. That is the heart of Rule 3. Do not waste difficult experiences by merely suffering through them. Examine them, learn from them, and allow them to strengthen the person who has to face the next day. A surprising amount of mental exhaustion comes from problems that have not happened yet. You are sitting quietly, but your mind is already somewhere else. You imagine the conversation that might happen tomorrow. You worry about whether a decision will work. You picture everything that could go wrong. You rehearse possible failures before you have even taken the first step. Nothing has happened, yet your mind is already responding as though it has. Seneca recognized how easily the imagination can enlarge future difficulties. A possibility enters the mind, and before long, the possibility begins to feel like certainty. Think about an upcoming conversation. Perhaps you need to discuss something uncomfortable with someone. Instead of waiting until the conversation actually occurs, you spend 2 days imagining every possible reaction. You picture them becoming angry. You imagine yourself saying the wrong thing. You create responses to arguments they have not even made. By the time the conversation arrives, you are exhausted from a conflict that existed almost entirely inside your imagination. The real conversation may last 15 minutes. Your imagined version lasted 48 hours. That is an enormous amount of energy spent on something that did not yet exist. Epictetus repeatedly directed attention toward what is actually within our power. That principle can be applied to worry. If something requires preparation, prepare. If something requires a decision, make the decision when the necessary information is available. If something requires patience, practice patience. But repeatedly imagining possible outcomes does not give you control over them. Imagine you are traveling somewhere, and the forecast says rain. You take an umbrella. That is preparation. But imagine carrying the umbrella while spending the entire journey thinking about getting soaked, missing your destination, ruining your clothes, and being stranded somewhere. The umbrella is useful. The constant fear is not. There is a difference between preparing for a possibility and mentally living through it before it happens. This distinction is easy to lose. You may tell yourself that worrying means you are being responsible. But responsibility produces action. Worry often produces repetition. You ask the same question again. You imagine another outcome. You create another scenario. Then another. Nothing changes. Marcus Aurelius practiced returning his attention to the task immediately in front of him. That discipline matters because the present is where action exists. You cannot study tomorrow. You can study today. You cannot have tomorrow's conversation today. You can prepare for it today. You cannot solve a problem that has not happened. You can strengthen your ability to respond if it does. That is a much more grounded approach. Suppose you are worried about an important presentation. You can spend the evening imagining embarrassment, or you can practice the presentation. You can review your notes. You can organize your thoughts. You can prepare for reasonable questions. Those actions may improve your performance. After that, continuing to imagine disaster does not make you more prepared. It simply consumes the energy you need for the actual event. Seneca's philosophy repeatedly returns to the importance of using time wisely. Every hour spent worrying about an uncertain future is an hour that cannot be recovered. And the irony is that worry often steals the exact energy you will need when the future finally arrives. A tired mind does not become more capable simply because it spent yesterday imagining every possible problem. Sometimes the most rational response to uncertainty is simply, "I do not know yet." That sentence can be surprisingly powerful. You do not know what someone will say tomorrow. You do not know whether an opportunity will work out. You do not know exactly how a difficult situation will develop. And you do not need to pretend that you do. Wait for information, then respond to reality. This does not mean ignoring genuine warning signs. If something clearly requires action, take action. If there is a legitimate risk, prepare for it. If someone has shown a repeated pattern, pay attention to the evidence. Stoicism is not blind optimism. It is disciplined judgment. The problem is when the mind takes uncertainty and fills every space with its worst possible explanation. Someone has not replied, so you assume they are angry. An opportunity has been delayed, so you assume it has disappeared. One mistake, so you predict complete failure. You feel uncertain, so you assume something must be wrong. These conclusions may not be facts. They may simply be stories produced by an impatient mind. When you notice this happening, return to what you actually know. What has happened? What has not happened? What can be done now? Those questions create a much cleaner mental environment. You do not need to solve tomorrow tonight. You do not need to experience next week's problems before they arrive. And you certainly do not need to punish the present for something the future may never bring. Prepare where preparation is useful. Think carefully where thought can change your actions. Then allow tomorrow to arrive before demanding that your mind live there. When the moment comes, you will have something far more valuable than hours of worry. You will have the moment itself, with real information and a real choice about what to do next. There is a quiet way to lose a day without doing anything obviously wrong. You are physically present, but your attention is somewhere else. You are eating while thinking about yesterday. You are working while checking what someone else is doing. You are speaking to someone while mentally preparing your next response. You finally have a moment to rest, but instead of experiencing it, your mind starts searching for the next problem. The Stoics placed enormous value on the present because they understood something simple. Your life is experienced one moment at a time, not in the version of yesterday that your memory keeps replaying, not in the future you keep imagining, not in other people's lives. Here, now. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself to give full attention to the task immediately before him. If he was performing a duty, that duty deserved his concentration. That principle sounds ordinary, but modern life makes it surprisingly difficult. Your attention is constantly being divided. A notification interrupts your work. A conversation reminds you of something else. Someone else's achievement makes you compare your own progress. A mistake from yesterday suddenly enters your thoughts. A future responsibility appears in your imagination. You move from one thought to another without fully experiencing any of them. Then the day ends, and you wonder where the time went. The problem is not always that you have too much to do. Sometimes you are simply giving one moment to 5 different places at once. Epictetus emphasized directing your attention toward what is actually yours to govern. That includes the way you use your mind. You may not control how many distractions appear around you, but you can decide whether every distraction receives an invitation. Imagine reading a book while someone repeatedly interrupts you. You read one paragraph, you check something, you return, you read another paragraph, your attention moves again. Eventually you have spent an hour reading, but absorbed very little. Now imagine giving the same hour completely to the book. The amount of time did not change. The quality of the experience did. Your day works the same way. A focused 10 minutes can be more meaningful than an unfocused hour. A genuine conversation can be more valuable than an entire evening spent half listening. A quiet meal can become restorative when you actually experience it, rather than mentally reviewing everything that went wrong. This is not an argument against planning. Planning has its place, reflection has its place, ambition has its place. But there must also be a place for simply being where you are. Seneca wrote extensively about the value of time and how easily people allow it to disappear. We often behave as though we have an endless supply. We postpone appreciation. We postpone presence. We tell ourselves we will enjoy life once a particular goal is reached, once a problem is solved, once circumstances become easier. But there is always another goal, another responsibility, another uncertainty, another thing to fix. If peace is always postponed until everything becomes perfect, peace may never receive an opportunity to exist. So begin with ordinary moments. When you eat, eat. When someone speaks to you, listen. When you work, work. When you walk outside, notice where you are. When you rest, allow yourself to rest. When something pleasant happens, do not immediately rush past it looking for the next thing. This sounds almost too simple, but simplicity is precisely why it matters. You do not need a completely different life to experience more steadiness. You may need to become more present inside the life you already have. There is another benefit to this discipline. When your attention stays in the present, many unnecessary comparisons lose their strength. You stop constantly measuring your progress against someone else's. You stop imagining what your life should have looked like by now. You stop replaying conversations that cannot be changed. You stop mentally living inside possibilities that have not arrived. The present doesn't answer every question, but it gives you something real to work with. Suppose you are working toward a long-term goal. The final result may be months away. You cannot live inside that result today, but you can complete today's portion. That is enough. Tomorrow will have its own portion. The future is built through moments that are handled properly when they arrive. This is why feeling better does not always require adding something new to your life. Sometimes it means removing the unnecessary mental noise that prevents you from experiencing what is already there. You may still have responsibilities. You may still face uncertainty. You may still encounter difficult people. You may still have unfinished goals. But you do not have to abandon the present while dealing with them. Give your attention to the conversation you are actually having. Give your effort to the task you are actually doing. Give your mind to the moment you are actually living. The rest can wait its turn.